Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 6-game slate here on DraftKings and FanDuel. This game has a ton of injuries, but it is a decent slate, I think. We have some good options here. We have a couple teams that we do like to use when they have injury situations that they've had throughout the season, and so that definitely leads to being able to make some pretty decent lineups. I will stress that it does seem like there's going to end up being a ton of value plays today, and it will be somewhat difficult to pick and choose those likely, so that is going to be something to have to keep in mind. But overall, the slate itself looks relatively decent. I have the Pelicans over Washington, Boston over Chicago, Milwaukee over the Knicks, Memphis over Spurs, Denver over Lakers, and Kings over Orlando Magic. So let's go ahead and get into the injury report today. For the Pelicans, Nance is probable, Zion and Ingram are both out. For the Wizards, Beal is out. For the Bulls, Caruso and Javonte Green are questionable. For the Celtics, Marcus Smart is doubtful. For the Bucks, Middleton is out. For the Knicks, Barrett is doubtful. For the Spurs, Keldon Johnson is questionable. Podol is probable, and Vassell is out. For the Grizzlies, Morant, Bane, Adams, and Clark are all questionable. That's going to make a huge difference on our daily fantasy today. For the Lakers, LeBron is probable, Westbrook is probable, Brown is questionable, Davis, Reeves, and Walker the fourth are all out. Then for the Nuggets, Jeff Green is out. For the Magic, Bol, Okeke, and Hampton are all out. So we do have a significant amount of injuries today for a smaller slate, but we also have some really good options on this particular slate. So let's get into the players we do like. We're going to start with the guards and Malcolm Brogdon here. So Brogdon has some upside because it looks like Smart's going to miss this game. Obviously, you want to check back and make sure that Smart misses this game. But anytime Smart misses, he gets a lot of upside. And while his price isn't, his price isn't too bad today for that situation. He's actually a little bit lower than his peak, and so that's definitely a nice place to get him. He's had some over 30 fantasy point games when Smart doesn't play, and he's usually pretty consistent at that, so I really like him in this matchup. He is going to be a core play if for certain that Smart is ruled out. Then we're going to look at Emmanuel Quickley here for the Knicks. Now, Quickley has been really solid since he started starting. Now, Barrett's been doubtful and questionable and out the last few games. If Barrett is out today and Quickley ends up starting, then I'm going to say he's a must-play as well. But it's a little bit more likely that Barrett could potentially play, so just keep that in mind. So don't, the expectation here is to, if Barrett is out, then Quickley becomes a great play. As you can see, he had some really big games in the last few. So then we're going to also look at Westbrook here, who is probable today. I know it says questionable here on DraftKings, but he is probable for this game. He has been playing most days, so I think he will likely play today. And he's got some big upside with all these other guards out for the Lakers. He's played really solid with Reeves and the what's the other guy's name? Walker out, and I expect that to continue here. He's going to have to get a little bit more minutes, especially with Davis out too. He's going to have to be more involved, and so he's been getting lots of rebounds and assists most games. He's been pretty close to some triple doubles as well, so if he can get one of those, which I think he had one against Orlando recently. Now this is a tougher matchup, but he still has upside here because his price is still just too cheap for his upside, and so I think he's in a great spot here on the slate. Then we're going to look at Trey Jones for San Antonio Spurs. With Vassell out, he does get more offensive opportunity. Now, obviously, his price point has popped up a little bit, and he's kind of right at where he is when it comes to fantasy. But he should have some upside in this matchup against Memphis, who might be missing some guys. I do think he's more useful if Memphis is missing John Morant. But I do expect him to play and be a good option. And then if Keldon Johnson is out, then he would pull into being a must-play. And then we're going to talk about Tyus Jones real quick. Now, Tyus Jones is the backup for John Morant. And if John Morant ends up sitting again today, then he is a auto must-play. He will be somebody that's going to be locked into everybody's lineups, especially after his game yesterday. He is just a guy that always does really well whenever Morant is out for the Grizzlies, and so if he is the starter, then he will be a must-play on the slate. he will be the top must play on the slate, in fact. So he has a tremendous amount of upside. His price is way too cheap if he ends up starting. As you can see, when Morant missed a couple games earlier this year, he ended up getting over $6,000 on DraftKings. I expect that to continue here, assuming that Morant misses today. Then we'll look at forwards, and we're going to start with Najee Marshall for the Pelicans, who's been playing extremely well lately with Zion out and Ingram out. And as long as those two guys remain out, he's going to be somebody to take a look at. Him and Herb Jones, as well as a couple others, are definitely interesting on these slates, including McCollum. I'll show you McCollum real quick. He's not really a must-play today because his prices come up, though. But I do think Herb Jones is also a great option today for the Pelicans. He has played really solid the last game with Zion out, and I expect him to have another decent game. It seems like Troy Murphy isn't playing well, so Herb Jones and Najee Marshall are the best options on the team there. Then we'll look at Julius Randle for the Knicks. He's been absolutely dominating for a couple weeks now. His last game under 52 fantasy points was against the Golden State Warriors on the 20th of December, and even before then he was having some really big games. He has big game potential here. He's been playing really consistent. The Knicks are finally starting to win some games with him playing like this. Him and Emmanuel quickly are playing extremely well as a duo as well, so he has some great upside here. His scoring has obviously been high, and I expect that to continue here in this matchup. Even though it's a tough matchup, I expect him to play well. Then we're going to look at Zach LaVine here for Chicago. Against Boston, this is a tough matchup for him, but he's had some really big games lately. His floor is a little bit lower than I'd like it to be today based on the matchup, but his ceiling is just as high as anybody's, and so he has some good opportunity. He's also averaged 34 fantasy points a game against Boston, and as you can see, he needs about 37 in order to 5x here, so he has some good upside here. He's a little bit risky because of the matchup, but overall he is viable here. And then we're going to look at Jaren Jackson. Now, here's one thing about him. He's very dependent for this particular matchup and situation that Clark and Adams are both out. He is viable even if those guys end up playing, but it just isn't as good of a play if those guys aren't out. But if those guys are out, then he becomes a must-play on the slate. And then at center, we're going to look at Daniel Gafford for the Washington Wizards. He has been playing really solid lately as the starter for the Wizards, and we do want to check back to make sure he ends up starting today, because if he does start, then he is a good play. Now, he only plays about 25 to 30 minutes each game, so do keep that in mind. So he does have a low floor as a result of that, but he also has a pretty good ceiling at the price point that he's currently at. Then we're going to look at Mitchell Robinson, whose price has dropped a lot here on FanDuel, or on DraftKings rather, for some reason. Now, his floor is very low, but his ceiling is actually high. Especially if Barrett is out, he'll have a little bit more opportunity. But like I said, he has a very low floor, so do keep that in mind. But his ceiling, again, is really high. He has 45 fantasy point potential in this game. Then we'll look at Joker for Denver. Obviously, this is a nice plus matchup here against the Lakers that have nobody that can stop him. He's been absolutely dominating teams lately. Obviously, he's had a couple off games, but he has big-time upside. And if you have the money to spend, then to pay up for somebody, he's going to be one of the top options on the slate. And I'm also going to mention Xavier Tillman here from Memphis. Now, he is very dependent on Steven Adams not playing, and then also potentially starting here. Obviously, had a huge game yesterday where he had 30 fantasy points. I look for another potential game like that, somewhere in the 25 to 30 range, if he can get the start today, if Adams ends up being out. In the last 3 games, in 3 games this season that he played over 20 fantasy points, he scored more than 20 in 3 games he's only had 3 games this season where he played more than 20 minutes, but all 3 of those games he scored over 20 fantasy points. And he's actually been pretty good the last 3 games overall as well. So I do think he's viable on the slate, especially if Adams ends up being out. So make sure to check those injury reports. You could actually join our Discord. We have a live injury report update thing in there that can help you keep track. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into FanDuel here. We're going to look at the point guards first, and we're going to start with Emmanuel quickly. He is very dependent on the fact that he ends up starting, and I really like him a lot better if Barrett ends up is out too, so that makes him a viable option here. Then we'll look at Trey Jones for the Spurs. With injuries to Vassell, he's been playing better and having more minutes, and I expect that to continue here. He's going to get in the 30 to 35 range in minutes, I think, in this matchup. And then if Keldon Johnson ends up being ruled out, then he's an even better play on this particular slate. Then we're going to look at Jalen Brunson here for the Knicks. He's been playing pretty well lately. His price is not super ideal here on FanDuel, but he has nice upside, and he has, even though it is a little bit of a tougher matchup, we'll have to see how the injury situations play out there. Malcolm Brogdon also playing really well with Marcus Smart out, and as long as Smart misses, then he's going to be a must-play on the slate. His price is not as ideal here on FanDuel as it is on DraftKings, so do keep that in mind. DraftKings today seems like everybody is a little bit cheaper than FanDuel is, so do keep that in mind. I'm going to play a little bit less on FanDuel than I normally do when I do play here, so just that's my warning there. For Kyle Kuzma, he's had some really good games lately. He has some upside here. He hasn't had the massive games that we typically like to see from him lately, but he has some upside with guys being out there, and especially Beal out. But we'll have to see what happens with him as he continues the season. Then we're going to look at Xavier Tillman from Memphis. Now, he is dependent on Steven Adams being out for this matchup. Otherwise, he won't get over 20 minutes or so. But he's had 3 games all season where he's had 20 minutes, and on all those games, he scored over 20 fantasy points. I do look for that to continue here, assuming that Adams is out. Then we're going to look at Julius Randle, who has just been a monster lately. And his price point here on FanDuel is actually pretty reasonable with his ceiling. His ceiling is extremely high, and he has some nice upside as a result of the matchup as well. Even though it is a slightly tougher matchup, he should be good to go here. Jaren Jackson also in a really good spot here. Now, he is very dependent he's not completely dependent on the other guys being out for Memphis, but I would like him a lot more if Adams was out. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but he is somebody that's viable either way. He's one of the few guys also that's price is actually a little bit cheaper. Sorry, that's not true. He's actually almost $1,000 more than on DraftKings, so do keep that in mind. I like him though if Clark and Adams are out. And then for the centers, we're gonna look at Gafford here for the Wizards. He's been playing pretty solid lately. He has some good upside here, but his floor is pretty low, so do keep that in mind. But as long as he's starting, then he is viable on the slate. And then the Joker for the Denver Nuggets, obviously in a great spot against the Lakers, who don't have anybody that can stop him. He's been having some absolutely massive games lately, and he has some upside here at this price point. Obviously, his price point is extremely high, but he has good potential here, especially in a plus matchup. So, with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.